Hi, grade sixes. Welcome back to another week of science. So we're going to build on what we learned on last week, which was biodiversity. And I'm not sure if you figured out what it means yet, but bio is a Greek word that means life, and diversity means different kinds. So biodiversity means different kinds of life. And as scientists, when we talk about ecosystems, one of the first things we want to know is what's the biodiversity like in the ecosystem. If an ecosystem has a high biodiversity, like my backyard from last week, we say that it's pretty healthy. And if it's got a low biodiversity, like the driveway, we say it's pretty unhealthy. There just aren't a lot of living things around there. Well, we've come out to the woods today to find an area with a lot more biodiversity. The reason why there's more biodiversity is the water. You can see that water has bugs flying around it. It's got green things floating on top and stuff swimming in it. Water is the most important thing for life on our planet. All life forms that we know of need water in some way. So come have a look at this over here. This area's got tons of biodiversity. You can see different plants, and you can see the water comes down here, and if we scoop up some of the water, we can look inside it, and if we're lucky, that's just gunk floating around, we'll see some microorganisms swimming in there. Now, if we take this back to the lab and we put this water underneath the microscope, we'll definitely see microorganisms in there. So biodiversity doesn't just mean the big things like deer and people and dogs and cats, but it means the little things too, the microorganisms. Now, we've got a lot of different life forms on our planet. And what we have to do as scientists is classify them. We have to find a way of putting them into boxes or putting them into groups. One of the first people to do this systematically was a Swedish scientist in the 1700s named Carl Linnaeus. And Carl came up with a couple of different ways of classifying things. He came up with a system called binomial nomenclature, which is a big word that means every life form gets two names. And he basically took all the life that he could find in Sweden and he broke it down into smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller groups. And today we use different systems, not quite the same system that Carl used, and our systems are still evolving. But the system that we learn in grade 6 is 5 kingdoms of life. And so if you take your list of 25 living things that you made last week, we're going to break them down into the 5 different kingdoms. And we're going to try to put each of the life forms that you found in one of 5 boxes. Now, the first box that Carl came up with is he said, well, and he would have had a thick Swedish accent, he would have said, you either the plants or the animals. And the difference between plants and animals for Carl was, how do you get your food? We're animals. We eat. Most of the little guys swimming in here are eating. But if you're green, chances are good you're not eating. If you're green, chances are very good you're doing something called photosynthesis, which is a big Greek word that means to build stuff from light. And what plants do is they take sunlight and they convert it into sugar. And that's the basis of all our food chains. So Carl said you're either a plant or you're an animal. And then looking at animals, which are all the bugs and the fish and the birds and the reptiles and the mammals that you've seen, we look at how they eat. But then he started finding other things that didn't quite fit into plant or animal. Let's go over here and look on these logs and see if we can find some stuff. All right, here's an old birch tree that fell down. It's in the process of turning into dirt. And if you look at it down here, you can see there's something funky growing on the side. It's what we call a fungus. There's one more over here on this side too. Now, a fungus isn't green. How it's getting its food is it's actually absorbing the dead matter of the tree. It's decomposing the tree, and it's absorbing the particles of the tree right through its cell wall and using it. It's not a plant, definitely not an animal. So Carl realized he needed a third box, which he called the fungi, or fungus. Now, if you keep looking around, you'll find other things. And once we invented the microscope, we found there are a bunch of really tiny organisms that were single-celled, and they don't have this really important part that our cells have called a nucleus. And we called those the bacteria. So now there's a 4th box. But then he found other stuff that wasn't a plant, wasn't an animal, wasn't a bacterium, wasn't a fungus. And so he came up with a 5th box called the protists. And protist basically is Greek for other. It's a category of life forms that don't really fit in the other 4 boxes. So today what's going to happen is I'm going to give you a worksheet. And the worksheet has the 5 kingdoms. Although I will tell you, if you're going to become a biologist, you're going to use like 7 or 8 in university. We break down the bacteria and a lot of the other single-celled organisms into different groups now because protists and bacteria didn't cut it. But we're going to use 5. And what you're going to do is you're going to take your 25 organisms from last week, you're going to look at my note on the 5 kingdoms, and you're going to fill in the chart, and you're going to take your 25 organisms and try to put them in. Now, I'll tell you, you probably don't have any bacteria, and you probably don't have any protists, and it's really likely that you don't have any fungi. So you probably only have plants and animals, which should be a pretty easy breakdown for you. But if you're keen on this stuff and you love learning about science and biology, get on the internet and maybe go back out in your backyard, see if you can find a fungus. If you can get to a stream safely with your parents, bring a jar and a magnifying glass and see if you can find swimming things in the water. They're probably protozoa. All right, I'll talk to you next week.